Hello, my name is Kumara Ward. I'm a senior lecturer at University of Dundee in the Division of Education and Society. This part of our symposium reflects Deleuzian ideas of becoming by looking at ideas of desire and agency in the more than human world. Desire in this sense is about the forces that shape and their agency in the process of shaping. It's a post-humanist perspective of becoming teacher on a wounded planet. In this presentation, I will trace the process of becoming teacher throughout my career and pause at gentle cuts in time that are reflected through a series of developing concepts that help to define me as a teacher. I began my teaching career working in a Steiner school in an alternative lifestyle area of northern New South Wales in Australia. It's a stunning subtropical environment, and the school in which I worked was a beautiful place with innovative curriculum, buildings, grounds and environment. In my time as a teacher here, I was responding to place, expectations of the school, parents and children, influences of others in the Steiner movement, and of course the environment. The creative curriculum and the process for teachers meant that all of the curriculum material was self-generated, and it reflected time and place in which we were situated. The verse that you see here was our morning verse and an acknowledgement of those influences. It goes like this. In the morning light we stand upright, the strength in our limbs renewed. As we greet the day, we are happy and gay and find pleasure and wonder in all that we do. We seek knowledge and truth with an active mind. Every new step, the light we will find. Each day, each step brings something new in all that we think, feel, and do. Teaching in this context meant exploring our own relationship to the natural world, as this in turn became a model for the children. Our own emergent performativity through drama, song or movement contained contextual information, affective intelligence and depicted ways of being. In this setting, the children's play began to reflect the stories told of phenomena and flora and fauna of the natural world. This became a key touchstone in my teaching and the focus of the research for my PhD. Place and belonging were reflected through drawing and painting. Watercolour experimentation was a process of agency of pigment and interplay with water and gave the children a sense of wonder about what would emerge. In this sense, it was a painting as a process of becoming and affect. Sculpture was also a process of immanence, where extensive multiplicities, to use it in the Deleuzian sense, or widely varied outcomes were possible, depending on who was doing the sculpting, what the motivations or prompts for it were, and the dynamic in the classroom. This brings me to concept 1. Barad's idea of the agential cut in time at this point is represented by recognition of the process of being, becoming, and belonging in place. The key influences here are sensory perception, sensory cognition, sensory affect, all of which are captured in contextual stories of being. After 15 years of teaching, I moved into publishing, a process of becoming in community and becoming in a different place, having moved to the Gold Coast, which was a different environment to my teaching location, but still drawing on Deleuzian intensive past multiplicities. There had been many influences in who I had become, and these were now reflected in stories that were to be shared publicly. This is an image of and from World Wanderer, one of my favourite story characters, who is a humpback whale who journeys from Antarctica to Hervey Bay in Queensland for breeding each year. Being open to the subtleties of place and interplay in the natural world, where the inherent agency was expressed through characterizing elemental forces, is seen here in a scene from Where Sundancers Go, where a sundancer and Merle Swirl mist dancer are playing in the early morning, and between them they create the magic of movement, which causes the mist to rise and evaporate. After my time as a publisher, I moved back into teaching, but now at the level of higher education, where I continue to use stories and place as a way of reflecting the world around me and the worlds that others share with me. After researching the environment from which a group of visiting early childhood practitioners came, I developed a series of songs and verses to share creative ideas for reflecting the natural world in their practice. This is an image of the Camanchaca, which is a band of moist air that hangs over Antofagasta in northern Chile. It develops due to a cold current at the northeast end of the southern Pacific Ocean called the Humboldt Current. This band of moisture that hangs just below the mountains of the Atacama Desert looks as if it's going to rain, but it does not. It effectively teases the human and non-human inhabitants and invites them to find ways of living with and engaging with it to capture its moisture. You can hear more about this through the song that was inspired by it by clicking on the live link. Consolidation of these ideas brings me to another A Gentle Cut in Time, Concept 2, where I am broadening the context for cultural or civic meaning making in a way that allows for recognition of the other as sharing our space, recognition of the other as having rights, and recognition of the other in relationship. As an academic, the imperative to conduct research is an ongoing expectation in the process of becoming, but for me was still influenced by my creative teaching practice. The IAPEN project investigated inquiry arts pedagogies in experiential nature education. Here, in retrospect, I am seeking to understand the desires or influences of my becoming by sharing my understandings and stories with others and asking them to share their own for the purposes of research. There were 2 stages to this research. Stage 1 engaged 35 international educators from 5 countries who worked with sustainability education and the arts to analyse the synergies between sustainability education and the arts through contemporary post-humanist approaches, particularly in relation to human interactions and relationships with the natural world. What arose from this was a series of recommendations about sustainability education for the early childhood sector that supports the implementation of relevant and accessible early childhood education for sustainability. Stage 2 used the pedagogical tool that these recommendations became, and it was piloted in 6 sites in Sydney, Australia, and a further 2 sites in Lincoln, Nebraska. The theoretical concept that emerged from this work was called econection. Eco as in ecology and nection as in connection. Econection is a state of being where one feels themselves part of nature, ecologically, ethically, and culturally. The natural world is perceived through all the senses as a creative melding of embodiment, affective intensities, and consciousness on a temporal continuum within which all actors are engaged in mutual flourishing. This implies we are a product of the econection desires of all that have gone before us and have agency and responsibility in generating the influences of human and other than human worlds around us now and into the future. The IAPEN research pedagogical tool, therefore, contained principles for econection, reflections for econection, and practices for econection. This work raised further questions about what being a teacher means in the field of research. What are a teacher's responsibilities? How do we faithfully incorporate the stories of others? What impact do we have on others? These ideas are consolidated in Concept 3, Critique of Self in Context and Place, where we see ourselves as part of a whole. We seek perspectives of others and the other than human. we recognize the agency of the other than human, and we begin to understand the nature of Barad's intra-action and responsibility for our actions. A natural progression to consolidate these ideas is to question the role of practice and research in education. A sense of meaning arises, perhaps as a result of the desires of past intensive multiplicities and recognition of the agential cuts in time, but also the current context of the climate crisis in which we find ourselves. I find myself asking about our aims for education beyond the Marxist, humanist or neoliberalist constructs. What are we teaching to? Who will it impact? Is it for the greater good? What are regenerative paradigms? What needs to be included, and how do we recognise and act to support our own and our collective econnection? In recognising this need to teach to eco-connected regenerative paradigms, I recognise the need to encompass all the perspectives that are part of being in place, in space, on the planet. This leads me to working with the idea of Barad's diffraction, where we think of light hitting a prism and reflecting in many different directions depending on the facets in the prism. In doing so, one can ask, what can we learn from relational ontology and ecologically messy entanglements, as discussed by Barad or Ingold? Through Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing, as discussed by Martin? Through encounter, questioning and decentering the human, again discussed by Barad or Aldred? Through a young child's sensorial knowing rather than an intellectual or language-based humanist knowing, discussed by Malone, Moore and Ward, or messy entanglements of humans, non-humans, place and time, discussed by Taylor, and the temporal interrelatedness of stories and being in and with place by Ward. This brings me to concept 4, which is post-human and relational, representing intensive multiplicities where we recognise the agency of place and time, we recognise multiple stakeholders, ecomorphism rather than anthropomorphism, and a state of kinship with the natural world and the wisdom of indigenous knowledges. This diffractive approach must then be represented through multiple directions with multiple potentials for becoming. Based on Rudolf Steiner's 6 directions in eurythmy: backward, forward, right, left, above and below, the lines of flight here represent a series of continuums with which we must contend to engage with education for regenerative living and civic engagement. We recognise the past, human and more than human, who are collective and relational, which moves through our wounded planet to become a future where human and more than human create political earth narratives. We allow for recognition of the ecological past and deep time planetary resonance and work to reverberate it through into an eco-connected, ecological future that embraces climate change science. We identify the dissipating power of individual responsibility and engagement and transform this into social responsibility and engagement. This leads me to my current place in becoming, Concept 5, Education for Eco-Justice and Climate Change using creative pedagogies, innovation and the arts. In this role, we consciously decenter the human. We recognise the agency of time and look to the future. We recognise and challenge dominance and power, and we confront the culpability of being human. Thank you for your engagement. I'm going to finish with a song that was very popular in my kindergarten. It represents change and transformation. Journeyed on to dream, weaving, grinding, thread and grain, a new high drum to beat.
she ran with light under her feet, as nimble as a deer. She lived her life in the warmth of the sun, to laugh and play and run. A change is near, hope I'll ride through the path my steed has found. Made of gold and silver dew, strong hoofbeats on the ground. 3 long days and nights she stayed, watching the path of the moon. But where to find the silver horns, or pluck the eagle bloom? Feel free to join the last chorus. A change is near, hope I'll ride through the path my steed has found. Made of gold and silver dew, strong hoofbeats on the ground. Strong hoofbeats on the ground.